The true power of Astro is how simple it can be and yet how complex it can scale. Perhaps nothing demonstrates that quite as much as working with data in Astro. You could do something very simple, of course, like just keeping some data in the front matter of an Astro component and referencing it down below in the body, or you can do something very complex, like building a dynamic API endpoint that you can reference from anywhere, including like inside of a React component. All of this and in between is available inside of Astro. If you're interested in learning more about Astro, I've got a course coming out hopefully in just a few months. You can sign up for early access and 50% off the final price using the link in the description below. You and 800 others will then be notified when as soon as I launch that early access, where you can start to access it as I build the course out in public. All right, let's go ahead and jump into these 5 different ways that you can use data inside of Astro components. You ready? Let's go. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, so we're going to work through these 5 different ways to load data in Astro. There are other ways to work with data, and if I think about it, I'll mention a couple of them, but these are the ones that I use most frequently in Astro. Generally speaking, they work from most simple to most complex, so you can jump around the chapters if you kind of already know how to do some of these. I should mention that if you want to follow along, you're welcome to grab all the code from the main branch, and that's all I've got is kind of a starter template over here, and then we'll add to this throughout the video. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just load some local front matter data. So that would just be in an Astro file like this, and I could just paste in like this data1 array that has different names of people, and I can come down here and simply loop through this. Maybe let's do it in a UL, and I'll say data1.map. We'll take an item and simply put this item inside of an li tag. So just like that, I've got all 3 items just showing up right here. This is all server side. If you work with Astro before, you know that. And down here is basically what's rendered to the client. The content inside the curly braces down below the front matter can basically interpolate values. I can map over items. I can run JavaScript. Anything I can do inside of here, I can do in JavaScript. I can do inside of these curly braces. So that's the very first thing. And I use this a lot when I just have something very simple that's definitely scoped to that route or that component, and I just want all the data I need in that file. Now, secondly here, you can fetch remote data. Now we're going to be working with JSON placeholder right here. If you haven't used this before, it basically just gives you REST endpoints that you can connect to. So let's grab this post endpoint right here. This is the one we're looking at. So let's go ahead and fetch that remote data. Here, I'm going to just go ahead and capture this in a variable called res. And we can await at the top level here in this upper section because Astro essentially wraps this all in an async function so that we can do top level await. And I'll go ahead and fetch here. We'll just fetch that endpoint. Let's go ahead and convert that JSON into something that we can use. So I'll say const, let's call it data2. And this will be equal to await res.json. Now just to see what we're getting, let me go ahead and come over here and console log this, and we should get access to this. In fact, I've got here this extension by the folks over at Wallaby.js called Console Ninja, and it will give us this directly in line. Now, there are actually a couple of other things that they create as well. One is called Wallaby.js, which helps with testing inside of VS Code. And the other one is called Quokka.js, which does the same kind of helps, but inside JavaScript files. If you're interested in those, I'm actually giving 5 of those away, each license away to anybody who donates to my fundraiser this month for the Children's Research Hospital St. Jude. And if you're interested in that, stick around to the end of the video where I'll explain how you can get that. All that to say, though, you can see here that we got this data. It's an array of 100 items with a user ID, an ID, a title, a body. So exactly what we see over this way. Okay, so let's go ahead, and now that we know what we have, you know what? We can even type this because I am using TypeScript here. So maybe let's do that really quickly. We'll call this post. We've got a user ID, and that's a number. We've also got an ID, that's a number, a title, this is a string, and then a body, and this is also a string. All right, so just to be quick about it, let's go ahead and just say that we're going to get an array of posts back. Now I should be able to come down this way, and here let's put this all inside of a UL, and let's go ahead and just grab this and loop through this as well. So we're going to call this data2. Because I typed it, it does know that this is a post, which means I should be able to come on here and say I dot, and it should give me all the different things it could be. So let's say title, and then it should list off all the different titles we have. That's 100 of them. So maybe let's limit it just a touch. So let's like slice 0 to, I don't know, 4 or something like that, and then map over those. So now we've got the first 4 titles. So we've got local front matter. That's just something that you actually write in your file. We've also got remote things. So this would be great for working with like a CMS, or if you're fetching something on another server or some kind of server endpoint, you can do all this on build, and then it basically will build it on the page when you go ahead and run npm run build, and Astro will kind of do all of its magic. Now, one quick thing to note, and that is if you're using SSR, you can actually dynamically generate this from a live API endpoint. So every time somebody hits your page, it automatically then grabs your posts and displays them on the page. And again, that would be all server side, so all the user sees is when they come to the page, the most updated information. If you're interested in understanding what SSR is or SSG or their hybrid mode, check out the video I did most recently on choosing between different rendering options in Astro. All right, so we've got method 1 and method 2 down. Let's go ahead and work on method 3. So we're going to import local files, and I'm going to come over here and show you a couple of things. First of all, let's go ahead and create a directory. We'll call this data. You can call this whatever you want, but that's just where I'm going to put these files. And then I'm going to drop a bunch of different items in here. I probably could have had this in at the beginning, but you can see we've got a TypeScript file. This just has a list of authors. We've also got a JSON file, which looks very similar. It's obviously just JSON. We've got a markdown file, and we've got another markdown file. So we're going to work with these local files here, just fetching them locally from this file. So the first thing you can do is just import these files. So let's say like data3JSON. We'll call this from, we'll go up to data, and then inside here, we'll look at this JSON file right here. So the cool thing here is you can just import JSON directly inside of Astro files. So let's come down this way, and I'm going to grab this as well. We'll just kind of repeat the same process. In this case, I want to grab the data3 JSON like this. We'll get rid of that. We'll map over each of those items. But you'll notice that this import gives me access to everything inside the file: the age, the genre, the name, the nationality. So let's go ahead and choose the name. And this should list off the different authors in that file. Now, the reason I'm getting this is because I'm using the Astro extension, which you should definitely use if you're using Astro. So if we look at that quickly here, you can see that I've got those names right here, and those are the same ones showing up over this way. I just asked ChatGPT for a bunch of these, so I don't even know who some of these people are. All right, so let me go ahead and come up here, and we're also going to grab the same kind of thing here from our TypeScript file, and I'll just call this TS, and we'll grab this from our TypeScript file. And then I'll come down this way, and let's just go ahead and duplicate this whole section here. And here, I'm going to grab this from my TS file. Once again, I get access to every single item inside of that file. Here I've got age, genre, name, and personality. Let's just say age, I guess, at this point. There you go, just to show that it's working, and a name here. So that import gives you access to everything in the file, and you even get it nicely typed here for you. Now, if you're not seeing that like anywhere else in VS Code, you can hit Control and Spacebar, and it should give you that IntelliSense. Now, there are a couple other ways of working with data, so just one mention here that you can actually just grab several files at the same time. You do that with something called astro.glob. So I'll come in here, let's just say data3 glob, and I'll await this from astro.glob, and then you just have to give it a path. So here I'll go up to data, and then I'm just going to say anything inside of any subdirectory that has a markdown file on it. Here I want this back as data3 glob. We can see here, if I console log this, that I'm getting a bunch of different items. I'm getting any images that are connected to it, any front matter, the individual files for each of these items, and then there's other things that are connected with these as well. Now, there are a bunch of different ways that you can work with these markdown files, but let me just go ahead and come down here and copy this down again. And here we're going to take the data3 glob, and I'll mark over each. Let's just call this a post, and I'll get rid of this li here and just return something instead. So here we got the post. So here under post, I've got content. This is an actual Astro component that you can drop into Astro files that contains all the data from that file. I've also got compiled content. This is actually rendered to HTML from Markdown. I've got a bunch of other things in here as well, front matter, raw content. So anyhow, you can play with all of this if you want to. What we're going to do is let's first of all just go ahead and grab the compiled content. And this is a function. So if I output it like this, let's get rid of this UL here, and I save it. We should get down here just the actual HTML. Now, if you don't know this, in Astro, you can actually set things as HTML. You just have to explicitly do it so that you're not introducing security vulnerabilities if you don't know where that's coming from. So you could use something like a fragment and set HTML, and you could set this to data3 glob. And now you can see that that HTML is actually rendered and usable in my file. Now, you might remember we also had an Astro component we could use. For that, I can simply take the data3 glob. I can map over that. Let's grab the post from that, which is just the individual item. So let's go ahead and grab the content. I'm going to capitalize it just because that's how it is here, post.content. And now I can actually return the component of content. This is coming from right here. So if I save this, you should see that I get, let's see, down here. Now, because I commented this one out and then used the other one, it's hard to see that. So let's go ahead and remove that and then put it back. And that way you can see that I've got first right here, this would be this compiled content. And then right below it, I got this next section with the actual content Astro component. Now, out of all the methods I've shown you today, this third method of actually importing local data files is the one I use the least, and that's because of the fourth, which is content collection. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out just so we don't take up too much space over this way, and let's work on content collections. Now, somehow I see I did not close out that card component, so there we go. Okay, so content collections, how do you use these? The advantage is you can do data files or content files, but you get type-safe constructions with them. If you've used TypeScript, you know that the power is exactly what we've been seeing today. You can actually just tap dot and see everything available to you, methods, properties, all of that. So how do you set it up? I've done a full video on it, so this will be much more of an overview, but you have to have a content folder like this. Then inside here, you're going to need two things. First of all, you'll need a config.ts file. This is where you'll define each of your collections, and then you'll also need some collections. We're going to have a list of products, so I'm going to go ahead and add a folder called products because it needs to be the same as what we're going to define here. Now, there are a couple things you get, and I should mention over here, I was going to show you this, that you actually can just pull in public files. Astro just won't touch those, so you can always do those at the root of your server, but there are basically infinite number of files that you can actually import, and that's what we just did in step 3. Now let's go ahead and jump over to content collections. You'll see that, first of all, you have to define them. If I scroll down this way, you can see that you're defining your collections right here, and then you'll use them by using like the get collections API. Let's see, they give you that right down here. You can see the get collections this way. Okay, so let's go back up top here, and I'm going to switch back over and just show you how to do it, but that's where you'd find all the stuff I'm going to show you here. Actually, let's go ahead and grab this just to make it a little bit faster. So we're going to grab Z, which is a way of basically setting up what types are each of the front matter items in our files, and then define collection is a function that we get from Astro that allows us to define the actual schema we want. So maybe, again, just to make this a little faster, let's copy all of this. And I'm going to go ahead and come over here and we'll say product. And actually, I'm just going to remove all that. We'll just name it the same thing and come up here and name this product. Now, as of 2.50 and later, you can actually set this up as a data type. Now, the biggest difference here is what kinds of files can display this. So you can do JSON files or YAML files, and that's strictly data. So it doesn't have to render any body content or anything like that. So if you're not going to be using it for content, in other words, it's in a markdown file that has like items underneath it. Let's see if they have any examples here. Well, you know what a markdown file looks like, just like this. All right. So if it's not like this with content down below, then I would use a data file and just write it in JSON or YAML, and then you have access to all of that automatically, and it doesn't have to do as much work behind the scenes. That's my understanding of kind of why they split up those concerns. And that way you can have data stuff and you can have content stuff, and it will just render what it absolutely has to and won't worry about giving you all the methods you might need if it was a content file. So if that doesn't make sense, I'll show you here in just a second. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this. We're going to have a name instead of a title, and that will be the z.string. It will also have a price. This will be z.number. We'll have a color. This will also be z.string. This is just saying it has to be a string. Then we'll have a brand. This will be z.string as well. Finally, we are going to have a category for each of these. So this category would be z.enum, and this is essentially saying they can only choose one of these, and it has to be one of these items. And just so you don't have to watch me, I'll go ahead and paste those in. Now you can actually run additional things on top of this. So for instance, if you wanted like the price to be optional, you can just do optional like this, and then you don't have to include it in your front matter. But anything you don't have that on actually has to be included in the front matter of every item in this collection. You can also do other things. So like, for instance, I could say max, and this might need to be like, I don't know, maybe no more than 50 characters. And if it is, I can return a message that says something like, you must keep the name to 50 characters or less. All right. And then I would get an error if I mess that up. So with this set, I've got this content collections here being exported in a single export called collections. And what I can do then is come over here and inside this content, inside the products, and this needs to be named the same thing. So let's actually name this product because it has to share the exact same name. I can then add, in this case, YAML files because I'm writing data. So I'm dragging these in from off screen, but you can see that I've got the same things: the name, the price, the color, the brand, and the category. These categories have to correspond to one of the options available here. Now, just so you know, sometimes you actually have to restart the server here. So like, let's do npm run dev to get this back up and running. And now if you're getting any errors for types or things like that, like right here, it should be fixed at that point. So let's come over here and actually get that content in here. So let's come down here. We'll do data method 4. Right here, we'll just call this data 4. And this will be equal to get collection. This comes from Astro content, and then product. It's already giving me that autocomplete. So you might have noticed that I pulled in this get collection here from Astro content. If you don't see that import, it doesn't do it for you automatically there. Just make sure you write that up top. So with that said, let me go ahead and just console log this down this way. You do actually need to await this because it needs to go do that work and then get back to you. And let's console log this. So So you can see here I'm getting all this data back. Each of the data items have an ID, a collection, which is the name of the collection, and then the data itself. This would be the front matter. In this case, it's all the matter because it's data. All right, so let me show you what this would look like if I change this up slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these 4, and I'll add them back here in just a second. If I change this over to a markdown file, number one, it will probably yell at me because it doesn't match the correct item here, but I can add some front matter like this. Now it should work. If I come back over this way though, if I console log this, if I look at the console log here, I'm getting an ID. I'm also getting a slug. I'm getting a body, which is the content of the markdown file. I'm getting the collection, and then I'm getting all the data. So you can see how it's giving me a bunch of extra things, many of which I don't need in this case. But if I had some content down here, whatever this happened to be, I came back over here, you can see that now the body will contain all of that right there. So if you're not using this for content, it's better to just use markdown or YAML files rather, and then use those directly in here. And that way you're basically getting only what you need. All right, so there, I just dragged all 5 back in. Now let me show you what happens if you make that too long. So if I add a bunch of extra characters in here, let's make sure we surround this with quotation marks like this as well. You can see that I'm now being told, hey, you have to keep the name to 50 characters or less. And that's happening because of the config that I set up right over here, where I actually can set a maximum length on each of these items. So you can see how helpful this would be if you want to make sure that everything's consistent or works with your design. Really easy to set up those kinds of criterion on your config itself. Again, if you're interested more in how to set all this up, I will direct you to my content collections video. So you get type safe, markdown, or data files directly in here. Now, of course, what I can do is just come down here below, and let's grab all of this, and we'll drop this directly in here. And here I'm going to change this to data 4 for each of these items then. Again, I can just hit period. It should tell me that all my data is in here, and then I'll just grab the data.name. And down below here, you can see product 1, product 2, product 3, product 4, whatever. Again, the major benefit of setting this up as content collections is that you get type safe markdown. Again, if I come over here and I mess this one up, it's going to tell me exactly where the problem is, which file it's in, and the problem is right here. This category have an invalid enum value. To make it even easier to see, you actually get this right here and a link to open it in the editor. So you know exactly the line that's the problem. I can just switch this back, and now I shouldn't have any other trouble right here. So this is why I use content collections and much prefer it to just using data files like this, because you don't really have any control as you're inputting data. So that's number 4, content collections. Now, number 5 is about API endpoints. Now, of course, you can always create just like static files inside of here that you can access wherever. But what happens if you're writing like a React component and you want to access some of the data you have somewhere inside your source directory? But you know that Astro can actually build like live API endpoints, and those are perfectly accessible after build anywhere you need them. So like inside of a React component, for instance. So let's go ahead and create a component here. We'll just call it like API card or something like this, card.tsx. And I'll go ahead and just template out a basic React component here, and let's drag it in over this way. So right below here, we'll say API card, and I'll click on that to import it up above. Let's see, where did it drag this thing right here? So let's drag this all the way up top. Just add it right there. Okay, so now I've got my card showing up right here, API card. That's exactly what I have showing over here. Now, inside of Astro, if you want this to be dynamic and be able to do things and not just output static data, you do need to have some kind of like client directive here. I'll also do client load, which means it loads immediately, and that will load all the JavaScript needed with React. All right, so I've got this simple React component right over here. Let's say, however, that I want to grab these products, and maybe like when somebody clicks on a button, I want to show them all the products or something like that, right? So a very simple use case here, but how would I get them in some kind of way into here? I can't use the Get Collections API because that's only available in Astro files. I can come over here and I can create something called an endpoint. These endpoints are static files, or if you're using SSR, they're actually built dynamically whenever you hit them. And you can see that all we have to do is add them inside of the pages directory. So if I come over here and say something like endpoint.json.ts, or you can do JS as well, that works just the same. All I need to do is come over here and export a const get function like this, all caps. And this needs to be an async function. And you can pass in params or requests. In this case, I don't need to do either of those. So I'm going to leave it just like that. And I just have to return here a new response. I used to be able to just return like just an object, but they're trying to conform more to web standards. So now you need to return a new response. And I'm going to go ahead and JSON.stringify. And for now, I could just say something stupid in here. Let's say like hi or something stupid like that. And then let's go ahead and we'll just say hi1. All right, now after that, you can go ahead and have like headers. And here you can return like content type. And this would be application JSON is what we're going to return. And then down here, you could also have like a status. So I could say 200 when somebody hits this endpoint. And now with that, that's all I have to do. I now have an endpoint. So I can come over here and say endpoint.json like that. And now I see high 1. So really easy to get started with. Obviously, we don't want high 1. We actually want our collections. So I can say over here, I can say like const products equals await get collection like this. And this should import up for me. And then I've got access to that collection. Now it doesn't just have to be collections. You can actually grab like a file as well. So I could like import authors or something like that from, and again, I can just go to relative path, grab my data, and maybe grab this data 3, which was my author. So for either of those, I could just come in here and say something like authors, and then this should return to me all of my authors. Or I could say products, and this should return to me all of my products. So any of the ways that you can get data into an Astro file, you can now export as essentially like a dynamic endpoint, especially if you're using SSR. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to get rid of these authors right here. So now that we've got this endpoint created, let's come back over this way. Let's say like, I don't know, inside here, we'll say like get more items or something. And then down here, we'll have a button. This will say get it. And then we'll have an on-click handler. And this will point to something called handle click, which will just be a function that we write up top here. So here I'll say const handle click. And because I'm going to do some asynchronous work here, I need this to be an async function. We'll say const res equals await fetch, and I'm just going to fetch that endpoint. So we'll say, what was it, endpoint.json. And then we'll grab the data from here is what we'll store this in. That will just be res.json. Now perhaps we have some state that we track, so we could say const like products, set products equals use state from React. For right now, we'll just have that be an empty array. Inside here, then we could say set products, and we'll just set that to our data. Now in this case, I know I'm going to get back this data, and it will have an ID, a collection type, and then also, the data itself. And then finally, I'll come in here and we'll just say if the products.length is greater than 0, then I'll take the products.map. I'll take each product, and I'll just output a paragraph that says p.name. Now this should not work. We should get an error because we actually need to grab the data off of each of these items, but also this is not how you write these checks. All right, so I'm going to say if all those things are true, then do stuff. So if I click here, get it, nothing's happening, and that's because of this array here. So let's go ahead and just console log this to see what we're getting back. Now if I refresh and I click get it, now you'll see here I'm getting back a promise. So I also need to await this. Let's try one more time. I'll click get. And here we go. So I've actually got this right here, this data, but each of these data items, if you remember, have an ID, a collection, and then the data right here. All right, so let's just return the data, and then down this way, let's handle this a little bit differently. Now, just to make it a little easier on ourselves so we can actually get the typing from here, actually, maybe I'll just do it up above here. So I'm just going to paste in this data type right here, and that has the same shape as what we're getting back in our API. So if I come back down this way, now I should know that, so I can come in here and say products.length, that's fine. But here what I want to do is products.map, and for each of these products, let's go ahead and just extract, well, I guess let's keep the P in there. So we'll take the product itself so that I can come over here and say the key is p.id, like this. And in order to actually get that IntelliSense here, I need to grab my data like this. That also means I should be able to come in here now and I'll get access to my data and then also to like the name, for instance. So now if I click this, I get access to all those products. So I'm actually pulling it from an API endpoint that I generated from my content collections configuration. Now again, you could just have a public file in your directory over here. So I could have something over here that was the same as that JSON endpoint. Where was it? Right here. That would work just as fine. The problem is then every time I update this, I'd have to make sure that got updated and all that kind of stuff. So now every time I build my site, it will just automatically generate that endpoint for us and be accessible to anybody who needs it. So it's essentially like a live API endpoint in a static site in this case. And every time I build my site, it just updates it automatically. So those are 5 ways to work with data inside of Astro. If you're interested more in Astro, I've got a course coming out and you can sign up for early access right now and 50% off like I mentioned in the intro. I hope to have that early access available by the end of the year. So sign up right now if you don't want to miss that. Hey, well, thanks so much for watching. I hope this was a big help. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding. Hey, real quick, while I have you, during the month of September, which is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, I'm joining a fundraiser to raise money for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. If you donate, you have a chance to win some amazing items thanks to some generous sponsors. I have 5 licenses of Quokka Pro and Wallaby Pro code editor extensions. They're worth like $55 and $135 respectively. I also have 4 2-year team licenses from Cloud Cannon, the static site generator CMS, worth about $6,000 each. Now, St. Jude leads the way the world understands, treats, and defeats childhood cancer. St. Jude helps cure cancer in two ways. First, they care for families without any cost to the family itself, for treatment, for travel, for housing, for food, for anything. Second, they're a research hospital, and they openly share their research with other doctors and scientists. Treatments invented at St. Jude have helped increase the overall childhood cancer survival rate from 20% to more than 80% since it opened more than 50 years ago. Like I mentioned, the teams behind Wallaby.js and Cloud Cannon have donated free licenses to their amazing software for me to give away as an added incentive for us to raise funds. Now, how would you win one of these giveaways? Visit the site linked in the description and click the donate button. Then, and this is important, forward me an email copy of your receipt at chris@codinginpublic.dev. I'll reply with a donor code so that you can reference it at the end of the month during our public drawing. I'll do a live stream on Friday, October 6th, 2023, and randomly generate those winner codes and display them on the screen. Now, just to be clear, donating does not guarantee you will win a giveaway. Each dollar you donate will earn you one raffle ticket. Winners will then be announced at the end of the campaign during that live stream. Finally, I want to say a huge thanks to Mike and Steven of Relay.fm, a podcast network I followed for a long time. They've made it very easy to set up a fundraiser attached to theirs during the month of September. Now, you're welcome to check out their story and see how our collective efforts over the last few years have helped raise resources for St. Jude. Let's defeat childhood cancer together.